Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Favreau.
I'm John Lovett.
I'm Tommy Vitor.
Later in the pod, Tommy talks to Stacey Abrams' campaign manager, Lauren Growargo, about what is happening in Georgia. They're not at a recount yet. They're just still counting provisional ballots, trying to stop Brian Kemp from, just certifying the election.
Just stealing the thing.
Yeah. Lovett is back on Love It or Leave It.
I'm back
How was
on
it?
Love It or Leave It. It was great. We had a great show with Emily Heller, Langston Kerman, and Kieran Deal from Hysteria. We did an post-election special. We talked about the blue wave. We talked about sessions. We talked about ayahuasca.
Wow.
We covered
I
it
missed
all.
that part of the news. Tommy, what about Pod Save the World?
We
Worldos?
also talked about ayahuasca. This week,
You and Jake Sullivan.
me and Jake Sullivan talked about ayahuasca all for like an hour last week.
What if this is all
weird?
What if we're all in his ayahuasca experience for the last 2 years?
I thought about that a lot.
And he wakes up and Hillary Clinton is introducing a climate bill that doesn't go far enough.
Yeah, Jake's just napping in the National Security Advisor's office. Anyway, last week we talked about what Democrats winning in the House means for foreign policy, and then this week going to talk some North Korean news. Turns out, surprise, surprise, they're cheating and building all kinds of new missile sites all over the country, and the Trump administration is pretending it's not happening. So, good stuff.
So much for the love affair.
Great success.
Well, guys, it seems as though Democrats should have done a bit more gloating last week because we've won a ton of shit.
We won a lot.
More races have been called since last week. As of Monday night, it's looking like Democrats could expand their gain of House seats to more than 40 and limit the Republican gain in the Senate to 2 seats, or 1 depending on how the recount in Florida shakes out. That's because John Tester won in Montana, and on Monday night, Kyrsten Sinema was declared the winner in Arizona, the first female senator from that state, first openly bisexual U.S. senator. It also looks as though we may end up defeating 6 of the original crooked 7 out here in California.
Beautiful.
Fingers crossed. We're still waiting on vote counts for Katie Porter to take the lead. She's down about 1,000 votes now.
But we got Democratic officials filling out fake votes left and right, trying to get us over the hump.
That's good. That brings me to my question, guys. Guys, why do we keep winning these races? What kind of a deep state plot is this? Winning races a week after because they're counting votes.
It's so stupid. I don't know how the media isn't structurally prepared to just sort of contextualize the fact that some votes come in later. Like if you're in the military and you live overseas, you get to mail your ballot and it gets to show up a little bit later because it takes time to mail stuff.
Yeah, and I will say, like, the media did a horrible, horrible job of this on Tuesday night, and we fell victim to it. We sat here on Wednesday and we're like, oh, poor Kyrsten Sinema, she hasn't conceded yet, but she's probably going to lose. Because, we paid a lot of attention to news on Wednesday night, many different outlets, and there were too many people who were like we knew because we live in California that the California votes would come in late, but didn't know that, Maricopa County in Arizona had like 400,000 ballots left to count.
Yeah. We should also probably get better at counting faster.
Yeah, well, so I think the big issue on why some of these votes came in late were a lot of states going to vote by mail, right? And at least in California, as long as you postmark your ballot on election day, it still counts. So think of how long that takes to count. In Florida, at least, I think you had to postmark your ballot if you did mail-in by like a couple days before the election, so it was different. And then Arizona does a lot of mail-in balloting too. And again, like there are just patterns, right? Early mail-in ballots usually favor Republicans. Early in-person voting favors Democrats. Election day voting favors Republicans. Later mail-in ballots favors Democrats. And these patterns have been the same for years.
Yeah, we only care about the after-election counting when it can determine the outcome of the election. I remember after 2016, some of the narratives around turnout had to be adjusted because there were so many California votes that got counted so late, but because they didn't affect the outcome and they didn't any close races, nobody cared. Same in Florida.
To their credit, the Arizona Secretary of State put out a long blog post explaining why it takes so long to vote. Part of it is there's a whole bunch of people who drop off their early ballots at the polls on Election Day. They said it's 320,000. So that means you need to verify all those signatures and then make sure they didn't also vote in person when they drop that off by accident. No one's alleging fraud here, but you could see why that's sort of an onerous process and takes a while. It just means like we need to remember that we're probably not going to get a whole bunch of results during midterms on election night, and we should just tell people that in advance. Like, you can't judge the blue wave on Tuesday night.
No.
Never again.
And many people did.
Right.
Many people said it's certainly not a blue wave, James Carville.
Well, and many people made fools of themselves days later, Brett Stevens.
Yeah,
I mean,
you get a little bit of an excuse on election night. You don't get an excuse
don't
a
get
couple days later.
I
on, man.
love when Brett Stevens decides to fight back to defend himself because it always means he's going to get a second round of people pointing out the ways in which his first column was so bad.
dunked on by Nate Cohn repeatedly.
I mean,
And Nate Silver, too.
it wasn't just like conservative columnist Brett Stevens. Last night, Monday night, there was an AP headline, no blue wave, but Democrats' midterm success sinking in, about all of these developments. In the piece, it says Democrats had their party had their best midterm performance since Watergate, since 1971. And yet the headline was no blue wave. So it's like, I mean, and to some extent, this whole fucking debate is stupid, whether you want to call it a blue wave.
To
all
the
the
all the extent. It's like we're debating whether or not an abstraction used to describe this
A metaphor is
yeah,
completely accurate.
Yeah. We should use the wave metaphor. The wave metaphor applies. God damn it! What kind of mainstream media nonsense is this? It had the crest on top and it killed a server.
You insinuated a tsunami. This clearly what? Come on, everyone. We're going to win like 40 seats in the House. That is astounding. And then all these governorships and state legislatures. It's a huge night for Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, once again, there's so much focus on personalities and individual races and ideology, and like not enough focus on just the way the demographics are in the country. And if you look, and a couple posters did this, basically on the entire electorate just moved 6 points more Democratic. And if you go race by race throughout the country, it's like that was enough to put Sinema over the top in Arizona because Hillary Clinton only lost that race by 3 points. That was enough to get Beto very close because Hillary Clinton only won that race by 9 points. She lost that race. So, like, if you go through the country, it's a pretty easy explanation for what happened.
Hey, John.
Yeah?
What do you call a video file of the bear from Jungle Book talking about the election?
What?
A baloo.wave.
It didn't have to happen.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm recovering from that. So does this? But to the point about the narrative,
Let's talk about the narrative.
It doesn't matter, but it does.
Yeah.
Because it does. It matter. Like, it informs how Democrats run on policy. It informs how we run in elections the next time. But it informs how the media treats Democrats taking power. Like, I do think some of the stupidity of the Democratic overreach thing is built on this idea that we didn't have the success we should have had, so maybe the strategy has been wrong.
Yep, and also Margaret Sullivan in the Washington Post, media critic, wrote a piece that was very good about this, and she said, some of this, and we're going to get to this, Donald Trump and the Republicans refusing to believe in the election results. It certainly didn't help that the media basically said, you had a great night, Republicans win everywhere. Like, it sort of fed the narrative in their mind, like, well, we were told, like, dumb people like Donald Trump, we were told that we won everywhere and that we dominated. What is all this about Democrats winning? It must be phony. It must be fraud, And so there is this narrative that sets in because the media said it was such a good night for Republicans that, just sort of feeds conspiracy theories too.
Yeah.
Anyway, so everyone should wait next time. Us too. So what do we think about, we should talk a little bit about this. What do we think about Sinema's win? She ran a pretty centrist campaign, barely mentioned Donald Trump, supported him sending troops to the border, and yet she, is in the lead by about 36,000 votes right now.
Yeah. It's just a good example that there's no one narrative or conclusion you can draw from the way Democrats ran across the country. You had Democrats running on Medicare for all across the country and doing really well on that liberal idea. You had Beto outperforming in Texas by running an unabashedly progressive campaign. You have Joe Manchin winning in West Virginia by doing the exact opposite.
Right.
So I think Ezra Klein wrote a great piece about this that you just can't make a simple conclusion based on this. It's a big complicated country, and you can't run the same way in West Virginia that you do in Texas, that you do in Georgia, that you do in Arizona, that you do in California.
Yeah. One thing about Sinema too is I was just reading some of the coverage of that Arizona campaign. She ran almost basically a one-issue campaign. and she ran on healthcare, and she ran on McSally's vote on repealing Obamacare. She ran on pre-existing conditions. And also, even though she ran as a centrist, McSally ran against her as former Green Party anti-war activist Kyrsten Sinema, and it didn't work.
McSally ran against Kyrsten Sinema circa 2000, right? Like, she called her like a terrorist sympathizer. They ran the most negative election they could possibly think of, and it failed. I mean, I think the most interesting contrast to me is the way officials in Arizona writ large have handled the election results and the uncertainty around them as compared to Florida. I mean, you've had McSally doing this classy video with an adorable dog where she conceded. You have the governor of the state, election officials saying, let's all take a deep breath. Like, voting takes a while, counting them all takes a while, and then you have fucking Marco Rubio going full InfoWars. Although he's like a dumb fratty version of InfoWars over in Florida, and like really potentially creating a dangerous situation.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about Florida. Races for governor, senator, and agriculture commissioner all face recounts that were triggered because the margins in all three contests are under 0.5%. Rick Scott leads Bill Nelson right now by more than 12,500 votes. DeSantis leads Gillum by 34,000 votes. And Democratic Agriculture Commissioner candidate Nikki Fried is now winning by 5,000 votes, a little more. And yet, as you said, Tommy, somehow Republicans from Rick Scott to Marco Rubio to Donald Trump are accusing Democrats of committing voter fraud and trying to steal an election. Rubio's phrase was actually that Democrats' lawyers are there to try and steal races. That was from Marco Rubio. Trump said that they should stop counting votes and, quote, must go with election night.
Dude, so imagine like Bob Bauer and Mark Elias like coming out with like pockets, just ballots falling out of their pockets and their coats. I mean, it's such a laughable, stupid fucking accusation.
Especially from Trump, it's not even about the recount yet. It's must go with election night, which means that all of the overseas and military ballots would not be counted. Must go with election night.
And as always, Trump hasn't thought about this very deeply at all. He's just thinking ahead, and he's thinking about being up in Florida on election night in 2020 and wanting to declare victory so that if he does end up losing a close election in a place like Florida in votes that are counted after, we end up, in the nightmare scenario of Donald Trump refusing to accept the results.
Marco Rubio tweeted, someone posted a photo of a box that said provisional ballots on it. And Marco Rubio tweeted about it and fanned the flames of paranoia about this box somehow was like stolen votes. It was full of envelopes and pens and signs that said vote here.
Really? I didn't know that.
He is such an asshole. He's an idiot, and he's creating problems. He's no better than Matt Gaetz, who said, for all I know, they're still counting ballots for Al Gore back there. Like, okay, your state humiliated itself in 2000. There was an election that was stolen from Al Gore in this awful way. Why would you raise the specter of that?
Right. And Trump is Trump. Rick Scott is very Trumpy as well. Marco Rubio, while acting very Trumpy in this situation, still craves the approval of the establishment in Washington and stuff like that. And so anyone out there, people, reporters, anyone, please get Marco Rubio on the record as to what evidence he has for the claim that Democrats are trying to steal the election, because he hasn't repeated it since the first week. He definitely knows he went too far, because now he's trying to say, no. It's about Broward County is a disaster and there's corruption and the election person there is, blah, blah, blah. He's trying to deflect all these things out. But originally, he said that they're trying to steal the election, and he has not walked it back. I want him on the record.
It's Marco Rubio goes to great lengths to not actually take a position when he makes these kinds of little kind of points to appease the Republican base, and he's never more indignant as when someone suggests he actually took a position.
Yeah.
But he's like, how dare you suggest I said don't count the votes? I actually was merely making a bunch of implications that you were supposed to read in the subtext of what I said, while not actually being able to find any actual principle inside of my words. And I would also say, if any reporters do manage to get to Marco Rubio and ask him a question about his crazy vote allegations, can you also ask him about some of the biggest issues facing the country from the past year, because he has been avoiding taking a position on virtually everything.
I mean, you got Catherine Harris out there being like, everyone needs to calm down, which is just incredible. But I think Marco Rubio also tweeted about this, and if he did not, I apologize. But a bunch of people were tweeting about a video of an elections worker using his personal car to drive provisional ballots to the headquarters. Everyone was freaking out. Like, the MAGA thing to tweet is like, let this sink in. Some man's driving ballots in his car. Election workers are expected to use their cars for that purpose. They don't have a fleet of election day cars that they get to use. And then Trump was out there saying, how come they never find Republican votes in Broward County? Rick Scott's vote count went up 70,000 votes. They found a lot of votes for him. They just found more for the Democrat because that's the demographic of the county.
Well, and also we should say, and the media was late to this too, Florida law enforcement, election observers, and now judges have all said there's absolutely no evidence of widespread fraud or forged ballots in the state. So don't take our word for it. Don't take Democrats' word for it. It's like we got law enforcement, we got judges, we got Florida election officials
It's also
appointed by George Jeb Bush.
Jeb.
It's funny, if you really examine it, the connection between the votes coming in late and the fraud is one that Donald Trump is implying somehow that once Democrats in these Democratic strongholds saw that Republicans might eke it out, they went to work to start filling out the fake ballots. Like there was this group of people quietly watching the returns, and then the second it looked like that Bill Nelson and Andrew Gillum might be in trouble, all of a sudden somewhere they're just feverishly filling out ballots as fast as they can, but not so fast as to not draw suspicion because they're all coming in after Election Day.
There's a New York Times story last night all about how this has been a Republican strategy. This wasn't anyone actually believing that there's election fraud. GOP strategy, according to Republican lawyers, strategists, and advisors, this is the New York Times, to, quote, treat the recount as the next phase of a campaign to secure the party's majority agenda in the Senate. I mean, it's just like the Kavanaugh. It's all about power. They don't care about the story. They don't care about the argument. They don't care about anything. It's just about power.
But also in Broward, like if there were some surge of votes for Nelson and Gillum in Broward, you might look at that and think, that seems irregular. In fact, they underperformed in the county. They got fewer votes out of the county than they do historically. So not great fraud, guys.
But it's important for, and a lot of media outlets just sort of like repeated in their social media accounts, and we can talk about this when we get to Trump's claim, Republicans claim that there was voter fraud, even though there's no evidence of that. But so media organizations need to fact check, and some of them do this very well. CNN does this very well. The next thing they need to do is actually talk about the motivation behind this strategy, right? Like, Republicans are not alleging vote fraud because they think there's vote fraud. They want Scott to win so they can have more power in the Senate. The NRSC wasn't mad at McSally because they believed she was the victim of vote fraud. They were like, hey, you're supposed to be lying like us so we can try to take this seat.
You should get that dog back onto that couch and you look at that camera and you say, if I don't win this election, Kyrsten Sinema is going to put this dog to sleep. All right?
I mean, meanwhile in Florida, holy shit. Meanwhile in Florida, like you have a former Democratic congressman named Patrick Murphy who tweeted that his ballot wasn't counted because of the signatures didn't match. So God only knows how many real votes are not being counted. That to me is a real scandal, not 22 votes in Broward getting missorted.
And we're going to talk about that too when you talk to Stacey Abrams' campaign manager in Georgia. There's still a big issue of provisional ballots not being counted, and on Monday night, a federal judge delayed the certification of the results in that state, wants the provisional ballots to be counted, and even demanded that a hotline be set up for people to call in and find out if their ballot was counted.
Well, just one more point on this, too. As we're talking about these bad faith efforts to make this about voter fraud, we're talking about what Bill Nelson is down by 15,000 votes. Under the previous governor, over 4 years, about 140,000 people were re-enfranchised because they were felons who then got their right to vote back. Under Rick Scott, over 8 years, only 3,000 felons were given their right to vote back. Now that's going to change because Florida passed Amendment 4. But one thing to keep in mind is as they're alleging voter fraud, regardless of what happens in this recount, they have done everything they could to suppress the vote and make the result ultimately illegitimate because there are hundreds of thousands of people in Florida that Rick Scott prevented from voting because he thought they would be Democratic votes.
Yeah, that's right. So how is Trump handling the blue wave?
Thoughtful, statesman-like, sober.
With his usual grace. On Friday, he blamed California's forest management and threatened to withhold federal funding as the state was burning from the most destructive fire in history, one that has killed dozens of people, destroyed hundreds of homes, and forced hundreds of thousands of people to evacuate. Then, Trump flew all the way to France, only to cancel a visit to an American military cemetery to mark the anniversary of the end of World War I because it was raining. And then yesterday, on Veterans Day, Trump canceled the unofficial presidential trip to Arlington National Cemetery, also because it was raining. What the fuck is wrong with this man?
I mean, just on the fires real quick. I mean, he's such a scumbag. 3% of California forests are actually managed by state and local officials. The rest are like federal government and logging interests and individuals. So like he's just so wrong on the merits. But the immorality of attacking people while firefighters are literally dying to try to keep this blaze from like consuming big parts of California is it's insane.
I don't care if a California state official started the fucking fire. You don't fucking send her a tweet saying,
Jerry Brown's out there with a Zippo. You still don't fucking say it.
You don't say that you're withholding federal funding to a state where people are dying as he was tweeting that.
The most destructive fire in state history. Raging.
I have to say, too, it's like it is something different when you're actually like in the place where Trump is attacking. You know, like
it looks like a nuclear bomb.
We're outraged about a million things he does all the time, all over the country. But when you're sitting there and you're driving around and like you see the smoke and you know people who evacuate, all this kind of stuff, it's just so deeply fucked up on like a human level.
Yeah.
Not all politics aside, just like this is our fucking president right now.
He has no sense of decency.
So let's talk about Trump and the troops, respecting our troops by going to. First of all, Tommy, was that a valid excuse that? So they said that Marine One couldn't fly in the rain, and then Secret Service basically Trump blamed it on Secret Service this morning. Said that it was too far to travel, but via motorcade, and that Secret Service said it wasn't possible.
I believe we have the technology now to predict weather, in particular rain or fog. So it's probably true that Secret Service said, no, you cannot helo in this weather. Fine. Get in the car, man. It's 55 miles. Like, the notion that Secret Service doesn't tell you not to do something. They advise you on safety. But, like, if the president says, you know what, I'm landing in Kabul and I'm visiting the troops in Afghanistan, they do it because he's the commander-in-chief. So I think we can motorcade an hour outside of Paris, one. Two, the notion that he's, like, really concerned about disrupting the commute of various Parisians as he lands in the U.S. the next day and fires off 5 tweets attacking Macron and the entire
country. I've caused traffic by the Arc de Triomphe.
As you know, I'm a globalist. I care about the people of the world.
Like,
I don't want to piss them off.
He just wanted to sit on his fat ass and tweet. And then, like, the not going to Arlington on Monday is astounding. Now, if a Democrat did this, we all know it would be the biggest story in the history of Fox News. They'd have an all-day special report. There's a structural imbalance that is making that not happen right now. But also, anyway, I don't want to. Like, I'm torn here because one, I am deeply offended that he wouldn't think it's important to go honor U.S. service members when he's sending them to war. Two, on the politics of it, this should be a career-ending thing, and I don't know why it didn't.
Also, I mean, we complained about optics debates when we were in the Obama White House, and Obama was hit by not just Fox News, but the Morning Joe set for not doing everything perfectly optics-wise, right?
Mm-hmm. But saluting with a cup.
Right.
He saluted with a cup one time.
Let's remember, this didn't just offend the right wing. This offended all the fucking people in Washington.
Yeah.
He brought a cup to his forehead.
But for Trump, it's not just about the optics when it comes to the troops. The New York Times also reported over the weekend that the 5,600 troops he sent to the border for an election stunt to stop the caravan have nothing to do right now, but will miss Thanksgiving with their families because Trump needed to juice the base in advance of the midterms. And this is from the New York Times story, quote, Pentagon officials privately derided the deployment as an expensive waste of time and resources and a morale killer to boot. They're there with little electricity, and they'll be receiving no combat pay while spending time away from their families during the holidays. They're literally sitting around eating MREs.
Just want to, this is a real bank shot, but I just want to remind everybody that Axios went into the Oval and let Trump tell a long bullshit story about saving money on a Sharpie pen because he's such a fan of being a good steward of tax dollars. They shot it like the end of Veep, but still, he did make that point while they're wasting like $200 million on this dumb fucking thing. And that's all.
Yeah, these are human beings. 5,600 human beings are sent to the border. They're sleeping in tents. They can see the Whataburger, but they're not allowed to go there. They got to eat the fucking MREs. They have no mission. They're passing out from heat exhaustion. They're not going to see their families on Thanksgiving. I mean, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
He's using them as a political prop. And remember, the reason he was in France was because he wanted to have a big military parade because he was jealous of Macron's parade. They convinced him that was going to cost $100 million. So to fly over to France to honor the service members there, and then he doesn't leave the hotel. The guy is a pathetic human being.
And someone ran the numbers too, and if the entire caravan shows up at once on the border, it would be only about double the daily load of people that they deal with, that the Border Patrol deals with on a daily basis coming to this country.
Yeah, it'd be like a 3-to-1 fight. Like
Right.
unless it's a bunch of Jean-Claude Van Dammes, I think we got this covered.
Right, so it would be a little more work, maybe add some Border Patrol agents from somewhere else for that day when the caravan shows up. It would be handled fine. You could process the asylum claims. It could be a very orderly process. Fine. But instead we have 5,000 troops there. Remember you said 15,000 before the election and everyone just ran it? Yep. 15,000 now, okay.
Meanwhile, I want to focus a little bit on the reason Donald Trump can't be in the rain. So he wakes up, and I do believe his hair is about down to his shoulders, maybe a little bit further. And what you see he has to do is and because of the surgery that removed part of his scalp, he has a big gap in the back. So basically what happens is he takes from one side and he goes up and over kind of on the, let's call it the x-axis, okay? And then he has to bring the other side, let's say the right side, forward and back along the y-axis, okay? So it creates a kind of lattice work, a delicate lattice work, which he brushes back using a hairdryer. So then he creates the wave both on the left side and right side of his face. Then he creates the lattice on top. Then he hits it with the hairspray, and he fucking hits it with the hairspray. If you remember, long before Donald Trump was president, he did have an issue, which is he did believe the CFC version of hairspray was far better than the ozone-safe version, because there was that brief period of time before they figured out how to make an aerosol without the CFCs, where you had the pump spray, and that was a fucking deal breaker for him because his life depends, his ability to leave his home depends on good hairspray. Anyway, he hits it, and he hits it for a while, okay? Now that is impervious to wind, basically, except toward the end of the day where you see those videos of it blowing off of his face, but rain, that's his kryptonite, all right? This is we're in an unbreakable situation. He is not safe in the rain, and he knows that all his power, all of his base, everything goes away if we see what happens when that hair is not held together by hairspray. If it comes down and he looks like a fat Merlin, people will freak the fuck out.
He's weak. He's
That's
weak.
it.
He's
That's
a
all I wanted
weak
to say about
small.
that.
He's a weak, small, petty man, and like. You've got Macron and Merkel out there honoring the legacy of these men and women. You have fucking Putin showing up, and he's giving them a big, how do you do? But then Trump, like, Macron went out and gave this big speech condemning nationalism and like putting a stake in the ground for how he wants the global world order to go from here. And Trump doesn't do anything about it until he gets home and sends off a bunch of bitchy tweets.
I mean,
that's his whole deal.
The truth is, Donald Trump doesn't care about anyone but Donald Trump.
Yep.
I've said this for a long time. And I think that every incident like this, it just feeds into a larger narrative and message that we have to push ahead of 2020, because we all remember ahead of 2004 when we all thought we could beat George W. Bush, no one knew what the message against Bush was. He's stupid. He's too far to the right.
W stands for wrong.
W stands for wrong.
Which was
fucking A.
W stands for
That was one of
wrong.
our slogans from the Kerry campaign. Anyway, there's like 10 different attacks against George Bush because everyone hated him so much. No one knew. Everyone was so angry they didn't know what to land on. I do think, especially if you look at some of the results of Tuesday night too, this idea that Trump only cares about himself. He doesn't care about America. He doesn't care about the troops. He doesn't care about working people in the heartland. He doesn't care about anyone. He
doesn't care about California. He doesn't care about California. He doesn't care about California forest management. He just views California as a place of non-Trump people in the same way he viewed Puerto Rico as being not for him. He attacks the places where he thinks people are not with him to send a message.
He is corrupt because he only cares about his own finances. Everything goes through the lens of Trump only cares about himself.
And I just, but what's a challenge about all of this? I mean, there are many challenges about all this, but like, we all know the game. The game is very obvious to identify. He lobs some lie out there, and the media reports it. But we still haven't learned the lessons from 2 years ago. Like, okay, so the caravan mentions, the week leading into the election, there were 40,000 mentions on TV. In the week following, there's been 11,000. What a surprise, right? But Trump goes out there and he tweets, the stock market is down because of Democrats. And the best you get out of that is like a fact check. CNBC tweets it, the quote, right? So that's great. Good work there, CNBC. But then the best you're going to get is an article that's like, is it true that the stock market is down because of Democrats? Well, the markets are not the economy. And it's a lie. The stock market is down because Apple and Goldman Sachs are down, because Apple's supplier tanked in an earnings report, and Goldman Sachs is getting sued, and it's a price-weighted index. Like, look, there's a very clear answer to why this is bullshit, and we need to lead with the lie when we're reporting this stuff.
And again, it's hard to just fight with the media because we're going to change very little about it. But Democrats in 2018, in their elections, learned the lesson that they don't have to jump at everything Trump does. And every Democrat, whether you were further to the left, center left, whatever, they ran laser-like focus on healthcare and pre-existing conditions. They did not take the bait. They did not talk about every single Trump tweet. The media has not learned about that. When you challenge the media about that, they will say, well, he's the president of the United States. We have to cover him. Yes, of course you do. But you also can learn to cover him with the proper context and proportionality.
Yep.
Right? And so, yes, of course the caravan is a story. Of course people should cover the caravan, right? Like some reporters are like, why shouldn't we? Of course you should cover it. But does it warrant being mentioned every day, over and over again, 24 hours a day, images on the news for a month?
Same as Hillary's emails.
Same as Hillary's emails. Same as Hillary. But of course, 2 years later, however many years later, how much self-reflection has been done about the Hillary email coverage? How much will be done about the caravan coverage? How much will be done about Trump saying that the election is not valid, it's illegitimate in advance of 2020? How much reflection are we going to finally fucking do about how we cover this man?
None, John.
Democrats should go. I mean, the answer for Democrats, because that's what we care about, is to go around the traditional media and do it in 2020. Don't give them the interviews. Don't. Just go get your message out however you can, through your own outlets, through your own methods of communication. Don't worry about the media.
We got a spot mark 2020 candidate right here at this desk.
I'm just going to spend the day talking about Jim Acosta's hard pass. And,
oh, yeah. We forgot to mention that. CNN
no, we didn't forget. Doesn't want to mention. He's not a good enough reporter to talk about him this
CNN
much.
suing Trump over Acosta's press credentials.
Give him his hard pass back, stand up for the press, but stop.
There's a couple of things I just put in another bucket before we Trump's also reportedly about to fire Kyrsten Nielsen, the Homeland Security Secretary.
Are they going to be are people in Manhattan going to protest that too? What's going to happen?
And also the Maryland Attorney General is suing Donald Trump over the appointment of Matthew Whitaker.
That's cool.
Saying that no, you can't just stick someone off the street who hasn't been Senate confirmed, into a job of Attorney General.
Right. Well, interestingly, though, at DHS, it's the third biggest agency in the government, and there's no deputy. They've even nominated one, let alone confirmed one. So they're going to have a similar problem there. It's going to have to be like the undersecretary for management, somebody you've never heard of, or a brick from the wall construction.
Or he just warms up the desk for Joe Arpaio, and everyone freaks out. He's like, no, I'm putting him in here. All right, let's talk about our friends, the Democrats.
Oh, which ones?
Yeah, they're winners. Blue wave. Party leaders say that the first legislative vote in the new House will be on a bill that includes automatic voter registration, restoration of the Voting Rights Act, public financing of elections, an end to gerrymandering, and a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. What do we think? Good idea?
I think that's a good 1 week messaging bill.
Yeah,
I'm cool with it.
I think it's a great way to start because it's a place where the caucus can be unified. It's an important message after the shenanigans from Republicans around this election, and I do think we're going to end up with kind of two big baskets of things we talk about for the next 2 years. One will be corruption, reform, chaos, kind of the Trump show and what's broken about it and what it tells us about Republicans, and the other will be policy. And so I don't mind starting with this kind of reform piece of it.
Especially while it's in the news. No one's going to give a shit about this 6 months from now.
Yeah.
Right, and I think...
The press, I mean.
I think it's a fantastic idea. Obviously we need to do all these things. And look, they range from, all of these are about what happens when Democrats are finally in power again in all three branches, right? In the House and the Senate and the presidency. And some of them can probably easily get done the first month of a new Democratic president, like automatic voter registration, stuff like that. Some of them, like an amendment to Citizens United, probably aren't going to happen for quite some time.
It's going to be a battle.
But again, so these are messaging bills. These are so Democrats can say, this is what we're fighting for. Mitch McConnell will not bring this up for a vote. Donald Trump will not sign this. You give us a Democratic Senate, Democratic president, this becomes law, which is a great message.
Yep.
I like it.
But as you guys both alluded to, the challenge here with all of these bills is keeping them in the news. There's also been a debate that's popped up now about how there's also been a debate that's popped up now about Democratic strategy when it comes to oversight and investigation. Tommy, you pointed this out on Twitter. The CNN Chyron yesterday was, quote, fears of overreach cloud Democrats' new strategy.
So unbelievable.
The argument here is that if the investigations seem unfair I guess, or if Democrats bring impeachment charges against Trump, that will turn the public against us and make people sympathetic to Trump.
No.
What do we think of this?
That's not true on any level. The Republicans investigated Benghazi for 4 years. That is the only reason we know about Hillary's private server. It did enormous damage to her, did enormous damage in the presidential campaign. It did damage to Obama and our ability to get stuff done. No one gave a shit about the overreach. We need to hammer him with subpoenas for 4 years. 2 years.
Yeah.
Excuse me, not 4.
Look,
2.
I think there is a risk. Newt Gingrich's Congress was viewed as basically just harassing Bill Clinton, and there was a backlash there. Some Romney strategists, Stuart Stevens, will tell you that the focus on Benghazi in 2012 actually hurt Romney a little bit. Like they should have.
Well, that's because he completely screwed up the message. He attacked people in an embassy in Cairo who were being attacked by extremists outside. Like that's how we fucked up. It wasn't because they subpoenaed people.
My view on this is it's not. If this was a normal president who had normal scandals, we could have this debate, and maybe there'd be good arguments on both sides of it. No, this is a man. Donald Trump is an unindicted co-conspirator to multiple felonies.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I get that Democrats want to be on message. I get that they want to talk about health care and we want to talk about jobs and wages. We have to. Like, that has to be the message going into 2020. That's why we did well in 2018. But we can't just let constitutional crises go by. We can't just sit there and be like, oh, the president has committed impeachable offenses, but we don't want to go after those impeachable offenses because there's a narrative that if we do, people think that we're being mean to the president and his base doesn't agree because Fox News is a propaganda machine that's brainwashed them. Like, we can't do that.
Well, it's this. It combines two things. One is it actual overreach on the merits of what's at stake here?
Yeah, right.
And I would love to see what someone believes. It's like I would love to see an example of what it means to go too far in investigating the crimes, mistakes, debacles, tragedies, horrors of the Trump administration. Like what is it that Adam Schiff can do that you think is on policy grounds going too far? Fascinating. Then there's this political question about overreach, and again, I feel. We'll know it when we get there, but why don't we do an investigation first? Why don't we do one? Let's take one investigation out for a spin before we claim that we've done too many.
Right.
And then the other piece of this is this question about how to, scandal investigations, they're sexier than hearings on how to make Medicare for all possible, hearings on education, hearings on jobs, and I think that's a reasonable concern, right? We're going to spend a lot of time talking about investigations. Donald Trump is going to choose to argue probably on that territory because it's where he feels most comfortable. So to me, one thing I would like to see House Democrats thinking about is how do you do policy investigations? We had hearings about Wells Fargo. They got the focus on what the banks had done and what Wells Fargo had done to abuse consumers. I would like to see House Democrats do investigations around abuses by corporate interest as a means to get to a sexy version of a policy agenda. I think that is a good route to go. So that don't just think about it as policy versus investigations, because that is a false choice.
Other thing I'd say is this is a bit of a silly debate because for the last 2 years, the Democrats in the House and the Senate were the message of the party because there were no leaders to the party, and they were both, they were the message. That was it. For the next 2 years, House Democrats are going to be able to investigate whatever they want. There's going to be a separate conversation happening among all the people running for president in 2020, right? So there's a difference between what Democrats do and what other Democrats say, right? Like the House Democrats, they can subpoena who you need to subpoena, do the investigation. The message of the party is going to come from the men and women who run for the nomination, and they're not going to be talking about investigations the whole time, nor should they be. They should be talking about the bigger message about policy and the direction of the country and the vision, stuff like that. Let the House Democrats investigate till the fucking cows come home.
The Republicans were manufacturing scandals, but they did not find any evidence of wrongdoing in Benghazi, except for the fact that the facility was not guarded well enough, and that was a huge tragedy and a problem that needed to be remedied. The Republican crimes are hiding in plain sight. Tom Price, Ryan Ziggy, you have cabinet official after official. We can subpoena documents and records and figure out all of the ways they were abusing their power and taking government planes on junkets to like their son's wedding and all the shit these guys were doing.
We don't need
Like,
to make stuff up.
we are going to find a lot
all
of
right
stuff
there.
that shows the culture of corruption in the Trump administration, the failure to drain the swamp in any way, shape, or form.
We're about to also see
Happy to do it.
Adam Schiff now has the ability to, with the Democrats on the Intelligence Committee, to start releasing documentation of their investigation, which Devin Nunes has been sitting on because that's how he reaches the wheel of the car. But one other thing about 2020, though, I am a little worried that what we're about to see is a bunch of potential Democratic 2020 candidates trying to audition for who's the right person to argue with Trump in a debate. And that is coming, and I understand why we're going to have to do that, and it's going to be quite grueling, like everyone kind of doing their
I have the best zinger.
their one act play. But to me, like right now, like I'm so much more interested in the policy side of that debate, and that's what this time I hope is for. And I hope the candidates thinking about running are thinking less about how do I make sure that I'm able to throw a punch and prove to the Democratic base that I'm a fighter versus actually thinking about the underlying structural problems that made it possible for someone like Donald Trump to get even within shouting distance of the White House to begin with.
100%.
I want to just subpoena him and do as much damage to his approval rating as humanly possible over the next 2 years. That is my sole hope.
That's what the House should be focused on. That's the House job.
Yeah, that's the House job. That's your job. That's our job. Like, I think that is not the job of a 2020 candidate. I do not think the 2020 candidate should.
Depends on where you are. I mean, if you're in the Senate, no. If you're Beto, no.
I think you should be spending time on talking about the country. Like, I think a lot of people have made up their minds about Donald Trump. I am interested in investigating subpoenas, not just for his approval rating, or primarily not because of his approval rating, but because he may have committed crimes.
May have. What are we doing here?
He's an unindicted co-conspirator, and he abused his power, and so we should do something about that.
The Wall Street Journal published this blockbuster story that he is the unnamed Trump official who was colluding with Michael Cohen on the hush payments to women he had been having affairs with, and it just sort of goes away with a whisper.
Yeah, well, hurry up, Bob Mueller.
Yeah, let's go, buddy.
Okay.
You got to beat that Whitaker guy to the I don't know, place where indictments are signed.
There you go.
The indictment.
Bringing some knowledge and expertise to the pod.
Get to that indictment pen before that Mike Whitaker guy can hide it.
It's a Sharpie now.
It's a Sharpie.
All right. When we come back, Tommy talks to Lauren Groh-Wargo, campaign manager for Stacey Abrams.